Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Science rules.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Inertia is a property of matter. T minus 7 seconds.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Hi, I'm Bill Nye.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am. And today we're going to talk about the history of chemical warfare, starting with the Romans, who threw sulfuric crystals in with butane, which is a common ingredient in asphalt. And they would create these flames that would produce noxious gases that would fill the chambers of the Romans' trenches, and that would suffocate the Romans, along with clogging their respiratory and nasal cavities. What the Romans created was SO2 gas, or also known as sulfur dioxide. This is the Lewis dot structure, and this is fatal to humans.
On a darker note,
The story of poison gas goes back to the carnage in the trenches of the First World War. It was here that chemical weapons were first introduced.
I was vomiting. The effect of gas was similar to drowning. It took off the lining of the lung.
Si sente sto fischio, ma si sente il fischio del gas, della bomba. E dopo, quando vai, guarda che c'è la bomba di gas, tutti quanti indossavamo la maschera.
Chlorine.
Please consider the following.
And now to our expert in chlorine gas, Vallacis. And here's Vafi now in his chemistry hat of science.
Well, chlorine gas. It is an extremely toxic gas to the human body, and if inhaled, it can cause extreme irritation to all parts of your respiratory system. It can also cause irritation to your eyes, and if it is in high doses, it will cause death. So the reason why chlorine gas is extremely toxic, first, when you inhale it, some of the chlorine, it will bond with proteins and lipids, and it'll destroy a lot of them, and thus it'll weaken your lungs. And then second, the chlorine molecules, some of them can bond with hydrogen in water inside your lungs, and so when it bonds, it can form hydrochloric acid, or HCl, which is pretty bad for your body.
Chlorine.
Check out this nifty experiment. So here we're making Cl gas. So we have HCl and potassium permanganate. So let's check it out.
Oh no!
The man who oversaw the gas attacks in Ypres was also one of the most important figures for chemistry in the 20th century. So Fritz Haber and his colleague Karl Bosch, they created this process to synthesize ammonia using nitrogen and hydrogen. And their original intention was to use the ammonia to make bombs. But however, the process, it was used to make fertilizers, and so it was one of the most important processes for farming, and that is why we still have lots of great farms to this day to sustain the populations.
Of chemical warfare is since World War I, tear gas has been no longer allowed in world wars, but the more modern version of chemical warfare is tear gas. Tear gas is used for crowd control and is also a very strong chemical agent that affects the respiratory system, but much less severe than chlorine. This will just make you cry and will leave your system very easily for a much safer use on civilians.
100 years ago, the world was first introduced to tear gas. The French military used it against the Germans in World War I to force their enemies out of their hiding places. It was used as an alternative to poison gas, which was banned by the Hague Conventions of 1899. 1919. The U.S. Chemical Warfare Service, led by General Amos Freeze, develops tear gas grenades for riot control.
It is easier for man to maintain morale in the face of bullets than in the presence of invisible gas.
The goal, to break the mob mentality, isolate the individual, make them concerned with only one thing: running away. Do that, and the mob will cease to exist. By the early 1930s, police departments were using tear gas. Prisons used it to prevent riots, and banks put it in vaults to prevent robberies. In the 1960s, the National Guard gassed Vietnam protesters, most notably on the Berkeley campus, where bystanders and children were caught in the fray. Today, tear gas has been banned on the battlefield, but it's still used to break apart riots and protests at home.
Thank you for joining us on Bill Nye this week. As always, stay cool, stay crispy, and stay chemical.